Hey Chi, how you doing?
Hey Cyrus, how are you?
Excellent. So today let's talk about the comic book industry and some of the many problems that it has.
Sure.
So, in the comic book industry's been around for a while, right? It's been what, about 100 years, if I'm not mistaken.
1938, if you want to trace it back to that, that's when Superman first got published.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's close to 100 years. Of course, comic book has existed as some sort of medium before that.
Right.
But if you talk about the actual American comic book industry when it kind of started, it really is the debut of Superman is the beginning of it.
Absolutely. And because all comic book superheroes flow from him,
Yes.
it's important to understand that there are many phases to it and there were distinctive periods in
Yes.
comic books.
Yes.
Right now we're probably in the third or fourth phase, I would guess.
I think they call it the modern age of comic books right now.
Sure.
I'm not quite sure anymore. I lost track because it started with the golden age.
Right.
Where Superman kicked off that. And then there's the Silver Age, which is the beginning of the Marvel Comics era.
Sure.
Then the Bronze Age, I think, was about the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
And then I think we're at the Modern Age phase.
Right,
But
that makes sense.
we may be another phase right now, which I'm not really sure what the terminology is anymore.
Right. It can be a little bit difficult to figure out what phase you're in the
Yes.
exact moment. Only when historians can look back and you really know.
Sure.
But let's assume it's fourth or fifth.
Okay.
Just in general.
Yeah, pretty much.
There are unique problems that I think that we didn't really address from the Bronze and the Silver Age that are really affecting us right now.
Yes.
One of them being Marvel's downfall in terms of their economic downfall in the 90s. That greatly affected the industry.
Yes.
We also have a lot of big issues with the publishing system that we have now. And then we're in a modern digital age, but
Yes.
we really haven't transitioned to that as well as we should have.
No, comic book is still kind of lagging behind in that area.
Right. So I guess the question I have is, why is the comic book industry in trouble? What are some of the systemic issues that are affecting it and making it difficult for them to be able to move forward?
Well, if you want to trace it back, the problem really started at the early 90s.
Okay.
When the industry went through a gigantic boom.
Okay.
The boom was very good at the time.
Sure.
Comics were selling to the millions easily. Any event can push it into that. But part of the problem from the boom is that it was what they call the speculation market, where
Okay.
people were buying 2-3 copies to try to put it away and save it to sell it for later, expecting it to be like the Superman #1 comic book, where 30, 40 years later it's worth like $1 million per copy.
Right.
So that was kind of where the spectator came in to buy books, just not to read, but just to kind of hope to make bank on it down
Makes
the line.
sense.
Yeah. So that was where the boom started happening, got bigger and bigger, but not realizing that because they're printing them into the millions, because there's a lot more, quantity available,
Right.
it's harder for them to have any value, sustaining value in the long terms. And that's, that was the beginning of it. So the market started inflating, like a bubble that kept getting bigger and bigger.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did that change the practices in the editing room?
Well, instead of saying, okay, every issue we're going to put out and make sure it's just whether it's a good story or just at least it's a story to put out for the reader, for a kid to buy from a newsstand, or go to a grocery store and they see it and they buy it. It went from very much saying, let's design something so it can hit big.
Right.
Kind of like the way the movie industry went from just making normal movies to now designing just blockbusters.
Makes sense.
That was kind of what happened with the comic book industry in the early 90s. Everything was event driven. This year, the X-Men's got to have a big crossover with all its books. This year, Spider-Man's got to do something. The Avengers got to do something to sell books. And on top of that, that was also when we came into the gimmick era, gimmick cover eras.
Right.
Where all
Spider-Man has a bike now. He has a motorcycle or something.
it's not even that. No. That was still more like story gimmick.
Right.
But what I'm talking about is the gimmick cover is that the cover starts to have like, holograms or full embossed.
Okay.
All sorts of crazy things you can imagine. And because you put out one of those covers, they can say, wow, look at this, is unique. So they started concentrating on covers more than the inside content.
Right.
That was the second problem that started after that. Designing stuff for events, designing books to sell just on the cover value.
Makes sense.
So the inside content sometimes does not even matter anymore.
Right.
It's just like, let's just crank this stuff out quickly, get it moving. and so the market just keeps inflating. People are buying more of these books for the gimmick covers. They don't know what the story is. Sometimes they even bag them. You know, they seal them in plastic bags, so you don't even know what's inside the story. But because they seal them because they come with a trading card or whatever. So you have millions of these kind of books being produced, right, flooding the market. You know, don't care about the story anymore. You know, only care about the packaging. And in that sense, the speculator market kind of reached a point where suddenly everyone's like, wait, if you have 5 copies of X-Men #1, and I have 5 copies of X-Men #1, and then Tommy down the street has 5 copies of X-Men #1, who are going to sell this stuff to?
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. On top of that, that was the one aspect of it. And then the other thing that happened was within the industry itself, it started becoming problematic too. Where because Marvel was making so much money selling books, the idea was let's start acquiring some of our business partners. Marvel was doing well with trading cards, so they purchased the trading card company Fleer. They acquired them just to do that. At the time, they even purchased Toy Biz, which was producing Marvel action figures. So Marvel felt, okay, we're up here, let's control all business partners. And the biggest mistake they made was to go and buy their own distributor. That was kind of the beginning of the end.
Sure.
Yeah. At the time, there was 3 distribution companies: Diamond,
Right.
Capital, and Heroes World.
Sure.
Heroes World was the smallest one, but that was the one Marvel decided to go buy. And then what happened was, when they bought it, they declared that all Marvel books would be exclusive through Heroes World.
Sure.
Problem they didn't realize at the time was that these 3 distributors each own there are regions that they share in distribution.
Right.
But there are certain parts only these that they particularly
Specialize in.
That's,
right.
that's
So
a good
certain
word.
parts of like the Northeast will be primarily working with one company.
Sure.
And Texas theoretically would be working.
Yes, something along that line. 'Cause I don't know the details, because I don't know how they operated precisely at the time. But that's kind of how what happened.
Makes sense.
So when Marvel went exclusive, that means there are suddenly hundreds of stores that can't get Marvel products anymore.
Big supply chain issue.
Yeah, big supply chain issue. And also Marvel was ill-equipped to manage a distribution system.
Sure, you're a comic book company. You don't know about distribution.
Yeah.
There's a reason why those companies exist
Sure.
in the first place.
And then, of course, that was one thing. They didn't know how to run a distribution system. They also had the issue of Hero World wasn't prepared to take the massive quantity that Marvel, because Marvel was the biggest producer at the time.
Sure.
They also couldn't manage to suddenly get a hold of all of their distribution. And I remember my local comic book shop, and this is New York at the time.
Sure.
Even the owner would, because I would go in, he knows I work in Marvel. He's like, I can't get books right now from Marvel, and or they would send me, and I'm short of certain numbers, and there was this massive problem all across the board.
Yeah, not surprising. When you just make a big change like that, all of a sudden, the market doesn't have time to really make an adjustment.
No, they should have done it in small increments. But Marvel was at the time making good money. They got a little greedy, and so what happened was suddenly you have bookstores, all comic book stores, certain parts of the region that's not getting books, and because Marvel was really floating a good chunk of the market, those stores not able to get Marvel comics, had to close down.
That's really unfortunate.
That's what happened. Suddenly, then you have comic book shops collapsing. You have, the other 2 distributor, Diamond and Capital, both also trying to sign exclusive contract with DC or Image or Dark Horse or whatever they can at the time.
It's a race to the bottom.
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom. Yep. Everyone is splitting the market and pretty much destroy the industry within about a year and a half to 2 years. From selling millions to suddenly, nothing.
Right. It's not a good way to operate.
Yeah.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah. So the industry was literally gone in 2 years. I mean, I remember when I was at Marvel. A Marvel has operated for from the 60s toward that point, about 30 or so years, 30, 40 years at that time. Marvel has never laid off people. And then when it happened, they were laying off people. It was a big deal in the company. Like people did not expect that was going to happen.
Makes sense.
Yeah, we have people who just shocked, and because suddenly the word would come down, so we got to cut editorial, we got to cut, staff, and it was then I think it set a bigger panic in the industry because it was unprecedented before.
Makes sense.
And everyone is trying to find excuses and reason from what I remember. Why this don't work, why that don't work, blah blah blah. And to be honest, there is no answer at that time too. Most of those editors has never gone through something like that, so they were ill prepared. And a lot of the younger assistants, they were just out of college for like a year or two, so they don't know how to manage that kind of stuff too.
Makes sense.
So when a company starts to take a dive, when a market has never experienced that, nobody has a solution.
Sure, especially you have to think about this too. A company that needs to start tightening its belt and cutting
Yes.
back is a very different atmosphere than a company that's expanding
Oh, yes.
and bringing people in.
Oh yeah.
The atmosphere in which you work, the things that you have to consider are vastly different, especially when you're thinking about budgeting,
Oh, yeah.
project creation and management.
Sure.
All of that really
Yeah.
affects it.
Well, the other thing is I remember when the layoffs are happening, it happened in waves, like 3 or 4 waves.
Right.
You go up to Marvel Comics, the bullpen area, where it used to be exciting. You go in, people are kind of busy, telling jokes, or hey, come on over, check out what I got. They got some new toys or whatever. When the layoffs are happening, you go in, it was like empty desks. And then computer equipment, because that was my Marvel was I was trying to shift into doing computer coloring within their own bullpen department. You have brand new computer equipment just sitting in piles sitting there because the guys were supposed to be working on them are gone. So it was really depressing.
Right.
And then death even occurred in Marvel Comics. People actually died. There was Mark Grunwald, who was the assistant editor-in-chief, who literally had a heart attack around that time period and died.
My goodness.
Yeah, oh yeah, a real death occurred. And that became a sort of that really hit people morale very hard too, because he was a very well-loved person.
So morale was hit pretty hard by that death then.
It hit the sort of the people that worked at editorial real hard because Mark Grunwald was somebody that people really loved.
Sure.
Never had anything bad to say about anyone. Just a guy who grew up in comic books and loved to be in the industry. So he was so when that happened, it was kind of almost a symbol of Marvel dying too.
Sure.
Like the heart of Marvel was dying. And then there was Jack Abel, who also worked was an old time Marvel. I think he was an artist at one point. Ended up working in the editorial staff too, and he had a heart attack and died too. In the office. I wasn't there that day, but I heard they were trying to do CPR on him that day too. So you had actual death that occurred that really impacted people, mentally too.
Sure.
Most of these guys were like 20, 30-year-olds, so probably has not experienced that much, grievance or tragedy in their life.
Right, and it's right there in front of you the whole time.
Oh yeah, yeah. And
pretty
so Marvel, it just feels like everything was in decline. Industry was in decline. The morale was in decline. People's emotions were on decline.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what happened to the other publishing companies that were operating during this time?
A lot of them went under.
Right.
These companies like DC is going to be fine, but there was a lot of smaller companies that just couldn't survive, and if they were just reducing their operations.
Sure.
Everyone was scrambling. Marvel, of course, being the biggest one that floated the rest of the market. If they were shaky and having trouble, everyone else is kind of being rocked along too.
Right.
So that was kind of the real beginning of the decline industry, and of course what happened with that is once you start cutting editorial staff, and reducing the number of books you publish, it affects people like us, the artists, writers, colorists, letterer. Suddenly there's less work to go around.
Right.
So what happened was it just kind of overnight, a lot of people who were either doing it for a long time or just kind of started out were suddenly getting less work and being pushed out of the industry,
Right.
through osmosis that way.
Right. And the big thing about this too is that this was self-imposed.
Yes.
This wasn't due to a bubble in the market. I mean, there was a bubble in the
Yes.
market, but they popped it themselves this time. This was due
More
to
or less, yeah. There's many factors too that comes in, but also you have we can even trace it back to the retailers.
Sure.
The stores. A lot of these stores were run by guys who grew up with comic books. Want to say, maybe geeky fans and all that kind of stuff too. Who didn't really know anything about business, but they were able to operate a comic book store because the market was so good during that time.
Right.
But when things started to get shaking, they didn't have the actual know-how to save their own store too. So more stores started going under at the same time.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and it was just a domino effect all across the board.
Sure.
Going from the overall market to distribution chain to retailers to even creative,
Sure.
staff being slashed and burned, which resulted with the entire market and the industry emptying out.
Makes sense.
People like me who was in my 20s at the time, early 20s at the time. If this didn't happen, I probably would have continued to stay with Marvel, and probably even move on to some editorial position. But guys like me who understood how they operated were not there to kind of pick up when things left off.
Right.
And I know later on Marvel hired new editorial staff, probably getting younger guys out of college or anything, but they didn't really go through the sort of that training, in-house, experienced editor telling you things like that here and there, and it really reflected in their publication too.
That's a cohort effect, essentially.
Yeah.
Because the cohort that was affected by that downturn left, and new people came in. Now they didn't transfer all of that same knowledge and everything.
Yep.
You can even see that with the art, for example.
Yes.
Like with it being portrayed. Nowadays, they're actually just trying to draw each individual page and make it fit. Rather
Yes,
than...
I've seen comic book pages that look like it's cut and paste.
Right.
Instead of artists, they're designing how the flow and the sequence and everything.
Exactly.
And that's just something that you don't have a more experienced editorial artist, passing down some of that tiny little knowledge that makes it work a little better.
Sure.
And that's invaluable, ideas and skills and knowledge completely lost to the industry.
Makes sense. So in our next video, one of the things that I really want to address are some of the normative problems that are within the comic book industry.
Yes.
Things that aren't necessarily easy to fix, but make it also great at the same time.
Sure.
So we'll talk about that for the next
Yes,
video.
well, definitely do that. So come back and join us then.
All right, thanks guys.